Andrew will talk about ethical dimensions of AI in engineering education. So we are planning to work till 5:30, right? Is it agenda 5:30?
Yes.
So tomorrow, just to be sure, now you know where we are, how things work. Things will flow smoothly for sure. And tomorrow is starts at yeah. We'll follow the agenda. We'll do our best to follow the agenda. Okay. So thank you.
Excellent. All right. All right, welcome back. So you all know already, I'm Andrew. I really like giving faculty workshops and faculty development workshops. So, and one of my favorite ways to start this is with a gimmick. Okay, so a gimmick, I don't know how well that translates. It's kind of like a silly thing to do. So I'm going to do this because I like doing it. All right, so I need you all to do a couple of things for me. Thank you. First, can everyone raise their hand? Good. All right, good. And now, thank you. You can put those down. I think I saw someone who didn't raise their hand, but okay. Second thing, can you introduce yourself to someone at your table? So just go ahead, take 15 or 20 seconds to say, hi, I'm Andrew. All right. Thank you all. Very good. Good. All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so I always love starting these workshop sessions that way because I'm going to ask you all at various points to raise your hands, to volunteer for saying things. And now I know you all can raise your hands. So if you don't raise your hands, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Second, I know you all can speak, although I already knew this from this morning. But now I know you all can talk with each other. There's going to be a lot of times when I'm asking you all to talk with your partner and things like this. And so now I know you can also do that, all right? So the reason I like doing that is to establish, hey, we all can do this. It's going to be all right. Okay, so for better or worse, you all are stuck with me for the next 3.5, almost 4 hours. We're going to try and make this very dynamic in the sense of I'm going to be talking a little bit about some ideas, then we'll break up into small groups and work for a little bit. Come back, talk about a few more ideas, break up. And so we'll try and keep it that kind of organization. Another thing, I apologize to everyone online. They told me to stay up here for the camera. I'm sorry, I can't. Yeah. So I'll try, but I'm not going to succeed. Another housekeeping thing really quickly. Okay, so hopefully the QR code is accessible for you all. All this is going to do is take you to that modules. I'll get out of people's way, but it's going to take you to that modules folder in a shared drive. At least hopefully it will. Is it working? Module? Okay, good. Okay. Module 3. All right, so this is going to be from module 3. All right, so we have these folders for you all. The worksheets that you'll need for the next couple of hours will be in this module 3 folder. And what I want you all to do, I'm going to watch someone do this, is to just download those Word documents because they'll basically have templates and things for you all to try and fill out. Also in that module 3 and module 4 folder are PDF versions of these slides. So if you want this for later or things like that, they're there. Just keep that in mind. All right. So without further ado, I think those are the housekeeping things that I wanted to cover. Now what we're going to talk about for the next little bit is around ethical dimensions of AI in engineering education. So I have, as you might expect, well, this isn't going to work, so that's fine. Good. All right, so as you might expect, yeah, some learning objectives. These are going to be around recognizing ethical dimensions, thinking about how to give your students some frameworks to think about ethics. We're going to give a framework for some different dimensions of ethics. that you may want to incorporate into courses. And then we'll practice with using some of these frameworks for actually analyzing ethics cases. This is going to be a little bit about what to do in your course with your students. And then in module 4, it'll be much more focused on how you actually bring these into your class, right? So that's the plan for today. All right. And what we're actually going to start with is, for the first few minutes, it's going to be the same as the lecture that I was giving yesterday, which is around, which is going to be around more of a theoretical grounding for what are the ideas that we're drawing on here. So we'll have this first block is going to be a little bit around just thinking about ethics, thinking about identifying ethical dilemmas. We'll have some personal reflection. So where do these ideas fit in with your own way of thinking about issues? I'll talk a little bit about some ethical theories and frameworks that you might be able to bring into the classroom to help your students thinking about dilemmas. And then some more on the side of application, and finally, some implementation. So how can you bring this into your class? All right. So this first bit is just to get an activity for us to get going and thinking in this area. It's going to be about 8 to 10 minutes. These time suggestions are very much just suggestions. So we're just going to see how this goes and adjust accordingly. And this is why I wanted you all to pull up that shared drive to begin with, is because this first one's going to jump right in to handout 3-1. So I'll pull this up so that everyone, just to make sure everyone's oriented. All right. So what we're talking about here is this document, handout 3. Whoops. Can I close this? Handout 3-1, fast scenarios. And the idea here is that there's just a few different ethics scenarios. The idea is to pull up that document, work with a partner, and you're really just trying to go through, see, all right, like, what do we think is the dilemma that's being mentioned here? The exercise right now is not how might we think about solutions to this. It's really more of like a sensitivity exercise, right? So that's the idea. We'll take around, like I said, 8 to 10 minutes. There are more instructions in that Word document, but the basic idea is just pick a scenario, talk about it for a few minutes, then pick another scenario, talk for a few more minutes, right? Able to hear okay?
Yeah, it's good.
All right, thanks. Okay. Oh, no, just pick one. So just pick one of those. Yeah. So pick one from like the A scenarios. So there's like A1, A2, A3, A4. So pick one of those, just talk about it for a few minutes. And then after 5 minutes, pick one of the B scenarios. And it's really just to pick 2 scenarios. Yeah. All right. To clarify, all right, just to make sure everyone knows, for the first part, just pick one. There's multiple scenarios there, but just pick one to talk about. And then after 5 minutes, pick a second one. There's lots there just for you all to have choice. Hey, thanks. Thanks. Gonna be a lot of this. Gonna be a lot of me. All right. What's this? Oh, that's all right. Okay, so that was 5 minutes. Okay. So that was 5 minutes. Now what I'm going to ask you all to do is just to pick a second scenario, second one that you haven't already done, and go through the same exercise again. All right, so another 5 minutes. In A, yeah, so the idea was to pick a scenario from A, and then to pick a scenario from B. If you don't do that, if you just pick a second one from A, that's okay too. But yeah, but that was the idea.
With the same partner because
Yeah, so if you can, switch partners. Again, if you're at a table with two people, don't worry about it. Just stick with the same partner. Thanks. So will this, okay, so does this pick up the same as this, or how does this,
it's the people's part.
okay, yeah.
It's pretty better.
Yeah.
Do you know this in Brazil? LGBT, Brazil.
Okay, so this is the version, this is the British version, or sorry, the Brazilian version of the, yeah, data privacy laws? Yeah, okay. So is this?
We have it here.
Here, yeah,
In Brazil.
Okay, yeah. Here's first framework that one. It's going to be. I know we software with actual. Five. So those $5 will be around parent, five, parent, five, eight, five, data security. So we're talking about can say that I don't want like a wide scale, but I think a lot of people interested in this kind of idea. I know that because there's a group in our CS department who's actually working on it. So I'm not aware of how they are saying to try to get it first. I know back in 2017, when I was still a graduate student, there was some people who had ideas about tracking students on campus through their use of like how they were using their ID card. Now, like swiping their card, campus, they were interested in doing some sort of network analysis. They're trying to say, oh, like which students are stupid ID card, and that was I don't know how it's here, but like our school had like a institutional review. They very quickly said that so probably a little bit, but yeah.
A Google form can be assumed as a protect data or
Yeah, I mean, it might depend on the nature of, so usually, at least for us, like I was saying with that IRB review, so IRB was that institutional review board. That's kind of the main organization, at least at our universities, that would be reviewing this ethical, reviewing protocols for ethical compliance. And there, the first question is always going to be, what kind of data are you collecting? So what kind of data are you collecting on the Google form? Who has access to it? Those kinds of things. They usually want to know. Form, like are all questions going to be required? Like, does the student have an option to opt out? So especially if we're student data and you're trying to do something in your class, when you're more experimental, I want to know, okay, does everyone have to do this? If they do opt out, are they going to be penalized or punished in some way? But sometimes what happens, people can require documentation as part of the grade. Okay, well, if you're requiring that, you have to have some alternative signing. So there's those kinds of considerations. Which was a class of independent. Yeah. Oh, I should also say, he asked questions, raised hand, and stop me at any point. That's the much better version of this. I said earlier that I like leading faculty workshop. That's kind of divorced from whether I'm any good at it, but like having these kinds of conversations, like that's part. Yeah.
The question is five.
Yeah.
In the island.
Yeah.
Used to have a camera. They would capture our faces and that would really jump on and would change over the faces for people. And that would be video that it was able to capture our face on that and change the person on in real life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nowadays we do have this very cute AI that make pictures. And schools and children, right, taking pictures of our son. We all know that they actually make very cute gifts for Father's Day and so on. So we have to watch out.
Yeah, and this goes back to like yeah.
Andrew,
Yeah.
it's great. So it's a following question coming from discussion. Did you use AI to produce this case? Or did it really?
Oh, no. This is good. Oh, yeah. I'm right to this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this was okay. No. So no, thank you. I meant to start the whole thing with this. These slides were made with AI. Okay. And the reason I'm pulling this up is to make sure you all knew what this looks like. So the way I make these slide decks, at least most of my slide decks these days. So this is what's called can't see this. Okay. Right, so this is a Quarto markdown document. And Quarto kind of falls off R markdown. So who's heard of R, like R, statistical programming language? A couple people. All right. So Corto is kind of like, Corto Markdown documents is kind of like an extension of that, or the next iteration of that. So what I want to do, the slide decks, presentation these days, is I'll outline my presentation. So I'll outline what I want to do, exactly, different blocks, how to organize it. And I'll go say, all right, here's the presentation. If I'm doing it from scratch, if it's something I've done before, I can stay right on that. If I'm doing it from scratch, and I'll say, all right, now, the in IDE, so like in this development environment, I'll say, all right, here's the presentation I want to do, and I'll basically use that sort of like a back and forth kind of editor, critique, kind of make sense. So then the way I did this, okay. So then the way I did this was say, here's the outline that I have on the screen. Now let's think about how we split this up. I have an activity that follows on with the like that, or I want to think about the warm-up exercise, for example. Like, hey, I want to have 2 blocks of scenarios, and I want to have some about these different colors, and I'll have to make both those. So yes, the answer. So the question was, did I use AI to come up with these scenarios? The answer is yes. So one of the idea was I have different scenarios. Most of the scenarios that I play with are like hospital training and ethics education. So most of the kind of banks of ethics cases are not right. They're not really specific to this kind of scenario that I wanted. So yeah. So that was what I did for the scenarios, the activities, same sort of thing. So you'll see all those Word documents. You'll notice that they have very clear kind of marking, so like headings and formatting, same sort of thing. So those all started as Markdown documents that I then rendered using Pandoc to Word documents. That way you can say, all right, I want to make this stuff here, I can make it, I can do this, and so on. So that is, yeah, how I use it for slides. You'll also notice possibly, yeah, so in the bottom right-hand corner of these images, right, I did not make this image myself in Adobe Illustrator or something. So in the bottom right-hand corner, I was being covered by the little there, but in the bottom right-hand corner is the little Gemini logo. So that was created by me, coming up with a list of images that I wanted to have, then going to Gemini, doing a prompt, say, I'm going to make an image, then copy the slide, and that's how those got generated. Right? Yeah, so what I'll have to do is right there, iterate on that, come back. So this is like very forward. Both of these are very forward. I don't know to show the file name of this big slide deck that I gave you all and yeah. Yeah, both of these like very forward, so me iterating. Right. So the first version, for example, of these slides had no theory. Saying, okay, I want to have theory located places. And so yeah. That was it. Hey, I did want to make sure that I mentioned that. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I was going to another housekeeping thing. So another housekeeping thing. There is more content here that we will have time for. My goal with these workshops is usually to give you all some ideas to bring back to your own projects for you to work with. So it's mostly to make sure you have the materials that you are interested in integrating something related to ethics in your classes, and you have a starting place. And you are interested in thinking, hey, your course is different sort of idea, concept I need to include, like here's the starting place. When you get to module 4, I want to have some guidelines for how to shorten starts, here's the starting place. So the point is, we'll probably do like a hard stop at 3:30, so we can 3:20, so we can take a break and then start module 4. We may not get to all of module 3 materials, that's okay, if you all have access to all that stuff in a shared drive. So we're going to start people work through this and want to make sure you all get your money for it when it comes to having things go on. All right, so we'll keep going though to this third pillar. This is going to be more about transparency and explainability. So when you all hear this, I'm very curious. So when you all hear the phrase transparency and explainability, concepts of AI or AI tools, what do you think about? Yeah, access, okay. Something else. see, here's the trick, see, this is why I do this. So I know everyone can raise their hand now, everyone can raise their hand, so I know I ask you all the questions. Okay, so, okay, so when you think about transparency and explainability, what do you think about? Yeah,
Process.
process from input to output, say,
Steps it took to
that's the decision there, all right,
We want them to do this.
okay, all the tools they use, okay. Well,
there's no given process.
yeah, there's only the process, okay, good. So what I'm driving at with this idea is the idea of, you know, or does the student know how some actually generates that up? Or is it as shown on that image, just a black box? Right? It's sort of like, okay, you don't know how it generated something, how that happened, is an open question, right? We saw, we heard Mitch talking this morning about different AI systems and how they're generally created, the idea of like transformer networks, for example, and that's good, but of course, these companies, they don't have a lot of interest in telling you exactly how they make any of these things. So that can lead to this huge issue of transparency and explainability. Okay, so that's the transparency piece. The explainability piece is just how can you actually explain what happened? And so you'll hear this phrase mechanistic interpretability. So that's a lot of syllables, but it's basically saying, how can you interpret what the neural network or what that architecture is actually doing? So that's the mechanism. They hear about this field of mechanistic interpretability. Problem is, that's a relatively small field in this area. And because there's so much that is just not very well known or characterized about how these systems work, there's still a huge problem of transparency. So someone mentioned transparency, like how do you generate, like how do you use these tools that they. So there's that element of transparency. So students' transparency for what do they do, or my transparency for how do I create these slides or these worksheets or things like that. There's also just the transparency of like, okay, how does the system itself generate that as well? Okay, so then there's an example here. All right. Engineering application where it will show up. And then a specific kind of work example. So the work example here is going to be around having AI system that flags output like a page drive. And have a level of confidence, but now it's another question. How did it actually come up with that level of confidence? How did it come up with this rating of like these page drives? And that's where this transparency comes up. And of course, if you're working with students, you're going to want to explain that to them. And they've been accused of cheating. Okay. And there's some questions that could go along with this in terms of how that decision be, how do you find that? Okay. We'll go on that forward. Pillar though, there's going to be around accountability and responsibility. Okay. Now I'll ask Paul the same question. When you hear about accountability and responsibility in this context, what do you all think about? And can I get someone from the back three page? All right, so the question is, I'll repeat it back and forth here. So the question I'll repeat it is just when you hear the phrase accountability and responsibility, what do you think of when it comes to thinking about AIs?
That's kind of problem that Tesla faced, right? The autopilot.
Okay, so yes, probably. Right, so if you say more, so the answer was it's kind of the problem that Tesla faced with AI auto. Yeah, so can you say a little more about that?
Because at the end of the day, who are gonna complain?
Right, so the idea is, I'm assuming what you're alluding to is AI, like I test the autopilot getting into the car. Is that what you're thinking about? Right, so imagine you have some self-driving car, so it's on autopilot, it's a pedestrian, now who's responsible? Driver? That's autopilot, right? So these are the kind of things that we're thinking about. We're thinking about accountability, responsibility, right? So you're using your classroom, get some sort of fade, okay, well, the student use plagiarism, are you responsible for that accusation? Is the AI system responsible for that same sort of idea? And these are just a few more examples of where that kind of thing may show up. So even if it's like an AI tutor system that gives a student the wrong response, or a student has a misconception, well, now are you going to say that AI is responsible for that student having that misconception, or are you ultimately as the instructor responsible for that?
And here's a work example. We'll leave that just to keep us moving along. So we get this good pillar and an actual activity. Right. This last one's around environmental and societal impact. So came up a little bit this morning, but not too much yet. Think about the environmental and societal impact of AI. What are some things that come to your mind now? And let's do this back 3 tables are on this side. When you go back, yeah, back 2 tables on this side. So when you think about the environmental and societal impacts of AI, what comes to mind for you? Yep. So water consumption. And the second one. What was the second one?
No, just.
But yeah. Good. Okay. So water consumption. What was another one? Energy consumption. Energy consumption. Sure. Good. Okay. So I'm always curious about this. So water consumption for sure. Does anyone like hear on why water is being consumed or how water is being consumed in processes by these systems? Yeah, so they're moving, right? There's these systems for running a lot of these GPUs, data centers, they generate a lot, right? So now you have these water systems, but that has a and so now, right, we as educators may also face challenges or ethical dilemmas when thinking about how do I want to have my students using AI. You're going to make an impact that I'm asking every student to always use AI in some way, how you expand that to all students and maybe education, right? That's a non-trivial amount of energy consumption. So that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. Same sort of thing, few examples, and then a work example. And again, what I'd like us to do is to have an activity, and we're not going to spend too much time on this. All right, so now we've got another 15 minutes or so for an activity. We're going to be using handout B-2 in that shared drive. And it's going to be around personal ethics compass and thinking about just where do those 5 pillars rank things more important, right? Or some of those more important to you personally than others. So as the name of the exercise is called, the personal ethics compass. Where are you as relates to thinking about these? By no means are they what we call like mutually exclusive, right? So that you can say they are all equally important, right? That's okay, or maybe some are more important to you than others. That's fine too. Okay, so the activity is really reflecting on those and then eventually sharing a bit. Now, what I have in the right hand column here is metacognitive thoughts. Right, so who's heard the phrase or term metacognition? Has anyone heard of this term metacognition? I know some people went to lecture yesterday, so you've heard of it. Who else heard of like metacognition? Metacognition, so like thinking about things. Okay. So these are going to be some questions that I just asked you to reflect on your own thoughts. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set a timer for around 15 minutes, and then you work that worksheet.
Tá. Então, ele vai ficar 15 minutos sem.
Vocês estão carregando lá na sala.
But like the students are just like accompanying us to each other. Os outros estão carregando lá. Deixa carregando aí. Mas na necessidade não chamamos. Porque agora eu acho que ele vai chamar a pausa.
All right. Thank you all. Okay, thank you all. So what we're going to do now. Awesome. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move on. The way I designed these this part was to have you all first working, by yourselves through that, and then sharing with a partner, like what are some non-negotiables y'all were already doing. Well, sounded like you all were already doing a good job sharing. So what we'll do is just move on to the next part of the module, which is going to be more about thinking about some ethical theory frameworks now. So that's going to be this next step. So you'll see if this goes on. Yeah, okay. So that this next exercise was around sharing. Y'all are already doing a good job with that. And since it's already 2:53, and I want to try and give us a break soon, let's go ahead and move to this next piece. Maybe. All right, good. All right, so this next one is going to be around ethical theory frameworks. And to start this, I want to ask you all a question. So maybe the first thing is okay, so this is like the English phrase is a loaded question. All right, so this is a question that has some underlying assumptions, but who thinks teaching ethics is important in engineering? Show of hands. All right, good, thanks. Next question, who teaches ethics in their courses in some way? Right. So it's good, yeah. That's not what I have. Good. All right, excellent. So that set of questions is actually what motivated my dissertation work. So when I was a graduate student, I've studied ethics education, like engineering ethics education. And it was all motivated by this observation that if I would have a one-on-one conversation with an engineering faculty member and, like, is ethics education important? Like, everyone would say yes. And then you ask them that next question, like, okay, do you teach it? And they'd say, no, that's somebody else's responsibility. And so there's a saying from Isaac Asimov, so that the most exciting phrase in science is not eureka, like I found it, but that's odd, like that's strange. So like some sort of observation that something's a little off. And that was the thing that for me was like, seemed a little strange. The reason I ask that is because teaching ethics, I think for lots of people can be challenging in some ways. For most of us, it's not like we had formal training in philosophy or anything like this, right? Some of these phrases and terms that you might want to use when talking about ethics may be a little unfamiliar, maybe a little uncomfortable in some ways. So what we're going to do for a few minutes is just talk about some frameworks that get used sometimes when teaching ethics, right? So by no means is this an exhaustive list. Is it not necessarily the best list? It's just a list that is going to be pretty common and gets used to at least frame discussions around ethics. So what we're going to do is talk through those frameworks and then jump into thinking, how can you actually apply them in different ethical scenarios? Okay, so that's going to be the next little portion here. All right, good. So then there's going to be 3 of these. It's going to be consequentialism, deontology, and then virtue ethics. Okay, so those are going to be the 3. Now, those are, fairly philosophical terms. The consequentialism is going to be thinking about the consequences of what's happening. It gets used quite often with the phrase utilitarianism, which is around thinking about the utility of some action or some set of actions. The short bumper sticker that you might use for this is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Right? So that's what's going to be around consequentialism. Again, the idea is thinking about the consequences of some decision or some action and thinking, is this going to lead to a good outcome, like a positive outcome, or not positive outcome? That's in contrast with the ontology. So the idea here is around like duty ethics. Like, what is your duty as an engineer, as a faculty member, as a citizen? These kinds of concerns. And then the third one is going to be around virtue ethics. So what would a good person do? What would a virtuous person, a good engineer, a good faculty member, a good teacher, good family member, like what would that person do? So those are going to be the three different approaches to thinking about, all right, in this scenario, when faced with this dilemma, how do I reason through this challenge, through this problem? Right? Now, those show up in professional standards in different ways, right? So different professional societies will have different codes of ethics, for example. In the US, this shows up, the National Society of Professional Engineers is like our sort of national organization that does licensing for engineers. And there's what's called the paramountcy clause. So the idea that you have to hold paramount, like hold most important. Paramount means most important. It's like hold most important the health, safety, and wellness of people. So that is an example of where this kind of thing might show up. And then you can think, okay, but like, is that a manifestation? Like, is that an example of virtue ethics? Is that an example of deontology, this idea of like duties? Or is this more of an issue of consequentialism, right? There's different ways of approaching that. But what I wanted to do with just that very brief, there are entire courses on engineering ethics. We're obviously not doing that today. This is just trying to introduce some language so that when we then hop into this next exercise, this next practice, there's some ideas that you might be able to use. And so what we're going to do now is spend a few minutes on this next worksheet or this next handout, okay? So this idea is, in that handout, there's a scenario, and the activity is to try and think through, all right, if you're thinking about this from the perspective of consequentialism, how might you think about this scenario? If you're thinking about it from the perspective of deontology or like duty ethics, like what is the duty, like what is the responsibility that somebody has in this scenario, if you're thinking about it from the perspective of virtue ethics. So the point is to think about it, these different frameworks and how they might apply in that specific example. I give an example or the scenario in that worksheet. If you want, by all means, feel free to use one of the scenarios from that very first activity when we started, that warm-up exercise. Feel free to use that as well. These are just trying to give you all some setting that has some dilemma to practice thinking through this. Now, the idea here is, sure, I'm not trying to suggest you all need a lot of practice. I'm sure, most of us has been on the earth for a long time, so maybe we don't need as much practice, but the idea is to give you all something that you can then maybe use with your students as well, right? So in your different contexts in the classes that you're teaching, maybe you want to talk about ethics in some way, and this is some way to bring that into your class, right? So that's the idea. Right? The suggestion here is around 10 minutes. I think that still gives us enough time because there's one more thing that we'll do after this, which is kind of thinking about implementation in the classroom. And that'll wrap up this module, and then we'll take a break. Right? So let's try and take about 8 or 10 minutes to work through this part.
Tá aparecendo aí, subindo? Tá, né?
Finding some way to have you all talk. Exactly, exactly. And it's one of these things where it's like, how do I do that? Do I tell you all just talk? Or do I how structured do I make it?
Yeah.
So like this, it's not like you're turning it into me. So it's really more like a starting point to then have conversations, which is a good point that I want to make sure to say that everyone knows that the expectation is not, turn this in for a great. It's really more, here's a starting point. Use this, for conversation with, because like you said, because that way you can then hear how your colleagues are thinking about things. It gives you more of a networking opportunity. At the end of the day, all I want to do is have this where it's everyone's talking and it's talking about things that are relevant.
Yeah.
But does it have to be exactly this thing?
There's no wrong.
That's the other thing, right?
Right.
But no, you're definitely right that I need to make sure that I am not trying to overwhelm anyone, right? Yeah. Which is good. No, that is true.
I just was thinking
Yeah.
about my students.
Right.
Maybe sometimes they are overwhelmed.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what, yeah. And that's why I need to make it clear, hey, the goal is talk. The goal is not typing everything in. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're just
Yeah.
we're collecting here.
Yeah, yeah.
This part, it's supposed to be for later, but
Yeah.
this one is the hardest one for me.
I know, right? It's like how to use multiple frameworks,
Yeah,
or or like the whole exercise, or just
because
question.
I'm learning this term
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
So
It's good.
how will I apply this in the future? So-
Yeah. Right. So it's one of these things where remind me again about your research. Yeah, your research. Yeah.
Sensor, the biothings, biogas.
Okay. So okay, good. So now and then with your students, are they ever or like what kinds of classes do you teach?
Yeah, so I teach like
Hi, welcome back. Hi, thanks. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Yes. Yeah. What do we do? Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
If you see me, raise your hand. And in this way, we propagate this. Right.
Good. I'll take any suggestions. All right. So thank you all. So that was great because I heard a lot of conversation, and from what I could tell, it seemed on topic. And I got a helpful comment from someone as you all were talking about the possibility of maybe feeling, this isn't quite what they said, but maybe feeling a little overwhelmed because there's like a lot of material and there's a lot of stuff in those sheets, which I appreciate. And I meant to say something about at the very beginning, which is to say these, first of all, sorry, is really going on. Yeah, not there, that's for sure. So first thing is these sheets, right? Like you're not turning these in. This isn't homework or anything. The way I think of these worksheets, these handouts is as artifacts. So, as objects that are trying to give you all something to react to, something to get conversation going. It's great, if you're filling these things out. If nobody touched them and they just use them to motivate that conversation, that's great too. So the way I like to think about workshops is the sort of delicate balance between me talking and introducing ideas, but really having you all have time to work with those ideas yourself, right? And so that's the point of any of these handouts, worksheets, things like that, is to motivate that conversation, keep it in some way on track, or at least related in some way to what we're trying to do. Otherwise, conversation can go in lots of other places. So try and keep it on track, but also not give you all too much that feels overwhelming, right? So if it's the case that You fill out 2 lines of it, awesome. If you find it's actually pretty helpful to help you think, that's great too. Also, as I said, some of these are going to be more for future reference. So it's already 3:23, so we're going to cut it. We're going to cut module 3 short. I do want to make sure that you all know that there is another worksheet there that's around trying to help you all work through or walk through if you're trying to design some sort of implementation guide for your own class. So it's trying to give you all some structure for how to think about that. So what I'll do for a moment is just pull that up to show you all, what that sheet looks like. But again, it's there for your reference. It's not there for you to have to fill out or something like that. Okay. So we'll do that for a couple of minutes. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and start module 4. All right. So this is that sheet that I was referring to just now. This is 3-4. Yeah, this is 3-4. It's an implementation design sprint. So the idea is you're going to design some implementation guidelines for your class, and then it's going to try and walk you through that. Now, I tested this earlier, so we're going to see if this works. It's going to skip through. Okay, good. So I can skip through that document quickly. Now, what you'll see here is just different phases or different parts, right? So trying to think, all right, if you're going to try and embed any of these 5 pillars from the framework that we were talking about earlier, where might those show up? And then if you're trying to think about a specific assignment, right, what might that assignment be? What kinds of guidelines might you actually write out? Now, the reason this is this last worksheet for this module is because this pretty much directly connects into the next module 4, which is around encouraging or helping foster responsible student AI use in the class. So it's going to very much feed directly into that. But that's the idea. So like I said, there's more here. It's just intended as a reference if you do want to think about a structured way to write some guidelines for your course. And if you have questions or things like that, I'm happy to answer those. That's probably enough for now. It's already 3:25. I don't know what is a good, maybe a 10 or 15 minute, I think. So it's 3:25 now. I'll be ambitious and say let's come back in 10 minutes. I know it'll probably be 15 minutes, but so 3:25, let's try between 3:35 and 3:40. I'll set a timer up here on the screen, but that's the rough time frame that we're looking with, all right? Awesome, thank you all. Yeah.
The guy's from, not from Sweden, he's from Sweden.
Ah, yeah.
The guys from Sweden, they didn't appear here. But
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. All right. All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. All right. Welcome back. So I hope you all had a nice break. We are going to hop into module 4. So if I got this working. All right. This is that same QR code that's going to take you to that modules folder. So if you already have that open, this is not going to take you somewhere new. It's just in case you closed it and you wanted to navigate back to that. All right. So it's going to be the same setup as before, where there's a module 4 folder. In that folder is a PDF document of the slides. And then there are 3 Word documents. And it's going to be the same setup as before, where those documents are going to be kind of like exercises or worksheets to help thinking through different ideas. In this case, they're a little bit more applied. So if you're trying to develop guidelines for your course, it's going to be more for helping you walk through that. All right, so go ahead and just keep moving. I did want to, let's see, good, all right. So it's around fostering responsible AI use by students. So it's going to follow on some of these ideas from module 3 around ethics, and ethical framework, ethical use, but it's going to be much more focused on students. And here, my goal for the next 90 minutes or so is to introduce 2 groups of ideas. One group of ideas is going to be around learning theories. And the second group of ideas is going to be around a specific kind of framework that you might use for teaching your students about not ethical use as much as like responsible AI use. So there's more here in these slides than we will cover, but those are like the 2 groups of things. There's a third category of things in this slide deck that's more about specific AI responsible use activities that you could use in your class. If we get to those, great. There are 4 examples there, but we may not have time to get to those. And that's why I'm sort of prioritizing those 2 groups. First, those learning theories that might inform some of this, and then the second being that specific framework, right? So hopefully by the end of this, we'll be able to think about designing effective strategies for teaching critical AI evaluation in some ways. We'll be able to maybe think about creating clear and actionable guidelines for AI use in your class, and then maybe start to think about assessment. This assessment piece is the one that's going to be at the end that I think we're going to run out of time for. But the great news is that module 8, which is tomorrow afternoon, is about assessment. So I'll be right back here tomorrow afternoon with you all talking about assessment. So whatever we don't get to really talk about today regarding assessment and assessing student understanding, we'll probably leave for tomorrow, right? Excellent. All right, so we'll hop into that first section that I mentioned, which is around learning science and some ideas there. These slides are going to be similar to the ones that I used yesterday, but I don't see too many faces still in the room from the lecture from yesterday. So that's awesome, because that means these are all new to you all. All right, so just a little bit of motivation around why theory matters in practice. So the idea here is going to be, what's going on? All right, so the idea here is going to be, if you're coming up with solutions, just sort of making them up, maybe they're not as grounded in any sort of like good reasoning for why you're doing things in your class. So the idea here is to give you all some specific frameworks, like I said, theory from learning sciences and education science and cognitive science for thinking about what are you actually doing in your class, why are you doing that. I like to do these types of things to then talk about them with students so that they can be intentional and have some metacognitive skills. We'll talk about what metacognition means in a little bit. We already briefly referenced it earlier, but that's going to be there. The idea is, what's going on here? Okay, so the idea is like with this theoretical foundation, you can just be much more intentional about aligning what you're doing in class, why you're doing it, how you justify that to students. You can connect that to research-based practices more easily. That's the idea here. And that's why we're going to spend a few minutes talking through some of those different theories. So what you're in for the next 15 minutes or so is me walking through some of those. The idea being I want to give you all some ideas that you can then use when you're designing your own materials for your courses and doing your lesson planning. All right, so the first one that we'll talk about is self-regulated learning, right? So who has heard of this phrase or this idea of self-regulated learning before? Excellent. All right, so self-regulated learning, you can think about this. There's a few different theories within this, and there's a few different ways of thinking about self-regulated learning. The one that we'll use is going to be from Zimmerman. It's basically going to be broken down into 3 different phases. So there's this first phase, which is a forethought phase. You can think about that as like planning and goal setting. Okay, so you're having students think about what are they going to do with their activities, with their learning. Then you have a second one, and there's a specific engineering example down here, which is maybe a student needs to design a heat exchanger, and so they're going to be intentional thinking, how am I going to use AI, right? They're sort of doing that forethought, they're planning ahead of time. Then there's a performance phase. So what am I actually doing while I'm in the process of completing some task? So there's a lot of self-monitoring in this stage, in this second stage. This also involves some help seeking. So when a student realizes, oh, I don't really know exactly what I'm doing here, that also leads to them seeking help. It could be help from someone else. It could be help from AI, some AI system. So here I might say, all right, well, the AI did this. Do I believe that? Let me check if that makes sense with my own intuition, my own beliefs here. And then the third phase of those 3 phases is going to be a self-reflection phase. So that is, you've done your planning, you've done some action, some task. Now you're reflecting back on what you did. Okay. And then here you have some self-evaluation. So what did I just do? Why did I do that? You're going to have some sort of like causal attribution. So this happened. Why do I think it happened? So the AI system gave me this kind of output. Why do I think it gave me that output? And then the idea is you close this loop. So you've planned. So a student has planned, I'm going to use the AI system this way. Then they start using the AI system. They finish the task. They reflect on what they received back from the AI system. And then that reflection should then feed into their next planning phase. So that is, student identified, oh, the AI system messed up this problem here. Why do I think it messed that problem up? What can I do next time to have a better output? For example, is what that cycle might look like. Of course, this isn't just about AI use, right? Self-regulated learning can be applied in lots of different contexts. It's just this AI example is because that's the nature of the workshop. All right. All right. So that's the first framework. The second framework is closely related, and it's going to be around metacognition. So metacognition and metacognitive awareness, like I said earlier, it's going to be thinking about thinking. So here you can break this down into kind of 2 different groups. There's metacognitive knowledge, and that can get broken down further into person knowledge. So students' knowledge about themselves or your knowledge about yourself. Can be broken down into task knowledge, so knowledge about the task that you need to engage in, a student's knowledge about what the task is that they're working on, so what's the problem that they're working on. And then this third one is going to be strategy knowledge, so how can they actually engage in that task? So that's on the metacognitive knowledge side, and then there's metacognitive regulation side, and that's going to align very closely with the self-regulated learning. So in that case, there's going to be like a planning phase, a monitoring or evaluation phase, and then a reflection phase. Oops, there you go. So there's monitoring and then evaluating, right? So when it thinks about metacognition, you can think about thinking about, okay, what do I know about myself? What do I know about the task that I'm engaging in? And then what do I know about how to engage in that task? And then as I'm engaged in that, how am I regulating it? So how am I planning? How am I actually doing this task? What have I observed after I finish that task? So you can go through those loops. Now, like I said, you can do this. This applies to us, also applies to our students. And so this is relevant because when we're talking about AI use, we can be intentional about what are we actually asking students to do? How does it align with these frameworks? How do we encourage students to think about what do they know about themselves? What are they learning about themselves? Are they being intentional about their planning? And then I've heard some people talk about this, and I'll sort of suggest this is a good idea, that as we are working with students and helping them think about how to use AI systems, we're starting to move a little bit from just a product-based like output approach. Did they get this problem correct or incorrect? And more of a process. Okay, how do they arrive at that conclusion? How are they using this AI system? And that's where this assessment piece comes in at the end, because now you need to think, how am I going to evaluate a student's use of AI in that process? All right. Okay, so then connecting these and where this might show up, just an example here. Maybe you're having students designing a bridge. So a senior student, the scenario is a senior design student must design a pedestrian bridge using AI tools while demonstrating engineering competency. Okay. So a self-regulated learning approach might have a student planning out, okay, how am I going to use the AI system to help me with this bridge design? Then that'd be a forethought thing. Then there's a performance thing. So as they're going through, the AI suggested this use, this calculations, does this align with my own calculations? And then the reflection. So AI system helped explore these alternatives. Why did it do that? I caught some error. What may have caused that error? How can I maybe mitigate that or address that error the next time I'm using it in this kind of system? So that would be an example of a self-regulated learning approach, and then a metacognitive awareness approach might be more on the person knowledge, students being aware, hey, I struggle with this kind of problem. So I may need to be extra careful when I'm using the AI to do that because maybe I'm less comfortable checking the AI's output. A task knowledge, so how do I know, what do I know about this task to begin with? I know it requires some creativity, some safety, or some other elements. How can I make sure those are being accounted for by some AI system? Strategy knowledge, so I know, okay, AI tends to be better helpful with brainstorming or some other kinds of tasks. Right? So that's kind of what those might look like in this scenario. All right, so that was second. So far, we've gone through self-regulated learning. We've gone through metacognition. Now we're going to talk about constructivism for a few seconds. And we actually already talked about it very briefly earlier when we were talking about social learning theory. So we talked about social learning theory, and I mentioned social constructivism because person who was sitting here had mentioned, oh, is that related to Vygotsky? And so as you can see on the slide, the answer is yes, that is related to Vygotsky. So the idea here is constructivism. So the idea is learners are constructing knowledge in some active process. This kind of is in contrast with like behaviorism, for example. So behaviorism is the idea that you're learning through basically some sort of like feedback mechanism, like positive rewards, negative rewards. With constructivism, in contrast, it's going to be more like a student is actively engaging in that knowledge construction process, either by interacting with other artifacts, interacting with other people, but there's a more active process or active role for the student. So there's an idea like a zone of proximal development. Who's heard of this idea before? A zone of proximal development? Okay. So a couple people have. The idea here is that there are some tasks that you or that a student can engage in without assistance. There's some tasks that you or a student can engage in and complete successfully with someone else or with the assistance of someone else or something else. And there's going to be some tasks that the student can't complete successfully with assistance. And that middle ground, tasks that students can complete with assistance, that's going to be that zone of proximal development. So the idea often with education is helping students, expand that zone of proximal development so that you're providing some scaffolding, right? So you're providing them some assistance, some guidance along the way, and then eventually removing that scaffolding so that they then can perform that task on their own. And as soon as they can perform that task on their own without that assistance, well, now they've expanded their zone of proximal development further out. That's the idea. Okay. Then, as I mentioned earlier, is more of a social constructivism. So the idea here is students are interacting with other people, other objects in the world, and through that, they are helping, or you're helping them construct that knowledge, often in class, or the whole point of like a lot of these activities today and this whole workshop is this idea of social constructivism, right? That you all are sort of co-constructing knowledge through your interactions with each other. And then these worksheets, these templates and things like that that are online, those are just the artifacts that you're kind of interacting with and reacting to. And this last one is just active constructivism, which is just a sort of an expansion of social constructivism, right? So that gets us to 3 different ideas or learning theories so far. Now I want to ask you all a question, right? So, and this is going to help us start to transition into the actual strategy for responsible student AI use. Right? So, question for you all is the following. Which is your biggest challenge in teaching AI ethics or AI like responsible use by students? So is it students resisting guidelines, that you yourself don't feel like you know enough about AI? Just so you know, I'm hitting the button, but like it may or may not move on to the next thing sometimes. So I'm not like intentionally pausing and building up suspense. It's just not moving. And it takes too much class time and it's hard to assess fairly, right? So the question for you all is, which is your biggest challenge in teaching AI use or responsible AI use? And I'm going to ask you all for a show of hands. Now it's framed as like, which is your biggest challenge? Because I am sure for many of us, these are all challenges. So I'm just kind of curious, like, okay, if you had to say which is the biggest challenge, what would you say? All right. So let's go in order. So the first one. So who says students resisting guidelines is maybe the biggest challenge that you face? Go people. For the record, it's not like I'm not recording this information. I'm just like, so no judgment. All right. Second one. I don't know enough about AI. Cool. Third, it takes too much class time to discuss responsible AI use. And then the fourth, it's hard to assess fairly. Right, excellent. Awesome. All right, great. So, it says at the end there that we'll address all of these. I think it says today. The assessment piece will probably cover tomorrow. So we'll cover these during the workshop. Very good. So, you may have some student perspectives that are like AI makes work faster or easier. Students may say, well, everyone's doing it. They may say, oh, I'm just focusing on getting the right answer. So maybe that's why I'm not going to use AI. So it's not just everyone's doing it kind of thing. Or maybe some students saying, well, they've got a pressure to be competitive. Again, this goes back to the everyone's doing it kind of perspective. So you may face these kinds of things. Now, there is the first activity, which I think we'll still do, is going to be a role-playing activity where one person is the student, the other person's the faculty member. And the idea is you're trying to have a discussion about why to do something, why to use AI or not use AI. I think we'll still do that. But as faculty members, you may have your own goals. And so now we're in this sort of dynamic where there's a negotiation between you and students. Right? And that's the point of this role play, is to maybe get some more practice, with a colleague, going through that exercise of, all right, if I'm talking with students, how do I do that? What are good or better strategies for having those conversations? All right. So before we get to that, okay, good. All right. So before we get to that activity, though, I wanted to talk about that second, what I called it earlier, that second category of ideas or thoughts. So I mentioned my big goal for this module is that you all have some ideas around learning theories, which hopefully you can then bring into your class, and we'll talk about ways to do that. And then the second goal was ideas around this framework for helping students think about responsible use. As usual, like the same with the ethical theories, frameworks, like there are other ways to think about responsible AI use. This is just a way to think about that. In part, it makes for a convenient acronym, right? So that is a nice mnemonic device to help us remember. Also, there's a bit of a cognitive load thing. If I can tell you all, here are these 15 different things, well, now we're too much. 5 different ideas is a nice round number. So that's why we're going through that. Again, there's other ways to think about this. So this TRACE framework is going to have some metacognitive foundation. Again, what's metacognition? Thinking about thinking. So it's trying to help students monitor their own learning, their own understanding. When we talk about these 5 elements of this framework, we'll then try and tie those back to metacognition and where that shows up. So I framed it as regulating your approach based on what's working, but it's also like helping students regulate their own approach based on what's working. All right. So what is this framework? So let's see if this goes through. T is going to be for task appropriateness. So that is, you're going to ask students to think, all right, if I'm using AI for this task, what is the nature of that task? So there's a task knowledge component to it. And then they need to have that evaluation of, okay, is that task frameworks in the metacognitive framework, and specifically the self-regulated learning framework with that evaluation piece, right? They need to be able to evaluate, here's what the AI output was. Is it correct, incorrect? So that's where that's showing up with this R. A is an authenticity check. So it's specifically like an authenticity verification. By here, I mean, can students verify where some information came from? Now, it's often going to be difficult with most commonly used AI systems because they're not necessarily giving their sources of where they got their information. So sometimes that can be more challenging, but it still is an appropriate or like a necessary step for students to understand, okay, where did this actually come from? And this comes back to the AI ethics piece as well. So that's why we're doing these 2 modules together, because it has like an explainability piece to it and a transparency piece. Right? If you're trying to ask students, can you verify where that information came from? Right? Well, if it's a very not transparent system, so very opaque, like difficult to understand system, that's going to be a challenge. But it's still an important thing, because if you're in any way going to have an issue of accountability and responsibility, and you're asking students to be using these systems, now they're going to be using them in some way, then you'll need that. They should be able to do this authenticity check. Context awareness is the C in this acronym. And that's going to be thinking, does the AI have the context to understand what I'm asking it to do? So if a student is asking an AI system to help design a bridge, for example, does the AI system have the context of the surrounding environment where that bridge is being designed? Does it understand even things like the local context? So what is commonly used, like bridge building regulations, for example, in Brazil, probably going to look a little different from regulations in the US, right? So it's this question of, does the AI system have the contextual awareness or understanding? And that's, so the idea here is you're asking students to think, all right, what is the context that they have given to that AI system? And then the E, which is kind of getting shown up, but it does appear on the screen. It's just the way that's showing up there. But the E is going to be the ethical implications. And again, that's pulling in these ideas that we had from module 3. Right? So it can be those pillars that we talked about. So fairness, bias, accountability, responsibility, right? Trustworthiness, transparency. It can be those, it can be others as well, but that's where this piece is coming in. All right. All right, so the idea is to try and help students build some of that competence or some of those skills in using this framework. So I want to ask you all following. And again, this is not necessarily one of those where there's like a right answer, but I am curious about what your initial impressions or intuitions are. So here's a question for you all. That there's a scenario where a student uses AI to solve a thermodynamics problem, let's say for a class that you're teaching in thermodynamics. And the question is, to you, just based on the idea that you've heard about this framework for maybe 5 minutes so far, which of those 5 do you think is maybe most important for the student to check first? So the options are that task appropriateness, a reliability check, an authenticity verification, context awareness, or the ethical implications. So the question is, student uses AI to solve a thermodynamics problem, and which do you think, again, I'm not suggesting there's a right answer, I'm just curious what you think, which you think is the element of those 5 that's maybe most important for the student to check first. Right? And we'll do the same thing as before, show of hands. So I'll go through those 5. I'll give you all a few seconds to think about this, and then we'll just go through the 5.
Is it an assessment or?
Yeah, so it's going to be in the context of a homework problem. Yeah. All right, so who thinks on a homework problem, a student uses AI to solve a thermodynamics problem, that the task appropriateness is the most important thing for a student to consider first? Cool, all right. And who thinks reliability check is the most important? Good. Authenticity verification, contextual awareness, ethical implications. Excellent. All right, good. Excellent. Okay, so thank you all for that. And I like asking this because I think we all maybe have slightly different intuitions or impressions about like which is the most important. Now, I'm sure we would all probably agree asking the students to do all 5 of these, or is probably important. But how we think about which is the most important, or what might we emphasize most, I think can vary a little bit. So it's just a nice demonstration of, oh yeah, we each have maybe different things we focus on. All right. It's already 4:27, and I'd actually rather us work a little bit rather than me talking more. So what I'm going to do is walk through one of these so that you know the format for like the remaining 4, and so that you know that they are there in that slide deck. But what I'm actually going to do is just move us to the activity after this so that we can then, again, like have you all talking more. I think, you've seen enough ideas for right now, and it's probably better, more productive to have you all working together. That said, these 5 slides, or for these 5 pillars, it looks like the following. So for that task appropriateness, what are some questions that a student can ask? What are some metacognitive prompts? So what can they be asking themselves? And again, that's going to show up before AI use, during AI use, and then after AI use. So in this case, with task appropriateness, students should think to themselves, okay, what am I learning? Or what am I trying to learn from this task? During AI use might be, am I learning or just getting answers? And then after AI use is going to be asking, how did this support my learning goals? So again, it's like the before, during, after. And then that after should then inform their next round of planning. And then there's just some engineering examples here of maybe what is or is not a good idea. This is just suggestions. It really does vary a lot on your context of what is going to be appropriate for the specific context. If it's a first-year student, probably gonna look very different compared with a 4th-year student, for example. But like I said, I wanted to go through this slide so that you see what the remaining 4 look like in terms of, here's some things that students can ask of themselves, some metacognitive prompts, and some examples, right? But what I'm going to do then is just skip ahead. And because this clicker is giving me some issues, I'll just skip ahead over here. All right. Okay. So this is the role play exercise that I was alluding or referring to earlier. So the exercise is that you all basically take turns, one person, so you pair up, one person is the faculty member, one person is the student, and you then kind of have the conversation around a faculty member trying to teach this framework and the student maybe being more or less agreeable, let's say. And so the exercise is to try and give the faculty members that experience of trying to convince a student or work with a student with this framework, right? So there is a document in that module for Boulder, and this is exercise 4-1, and then some other stuff. And the exercise is outlined there. I have this down for 17 minutes. We're not gonna run long today. So that means we're gonna stop at 5:30 because that's when it says we're stopping. And that means that we'll probably take a fewer minutes than 17 minutes to work through this, but we'll see how the conversation goes, right? So does anyone have any questions before we get started? All right, great. Get started.
Not much,
Excellent.
not much has changed.
Excellent, excellent. Very good, very good. Mitch, web development? What was it? Yeah. Yes.
I want to invite you guys for dinner tomorrow.
Yeah.
Go for it. Okay, so the plan is 7 o'clock. Okay, 7. But I'll send you, we'll share. Sainara will take you together with Andrea.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's I'm sure you like it. So it's a way of
Yeah.
thank you again
That'd be great.
for for everything you're doing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Look forward to
Okay.
it.
So I'm leaving now.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow morning. We have our group of co-writers arriving. They arrived this week.
Yeah.
The 2025, 26 cycle.
Okay.
Usually they are 30, but because of everything that happened since January 20, okay, so we have only 15. It's not because we don't have, no, just to explain to you.
Yeah.
It's not because there's no money, because the money was there, but people gave up.
Yeah.
Okay, people gave up coming because there's so much uncertainty, so
Right.
people decided, but we are in very good shape for the next year. So we'll have a lot of candidates, so I think we'll be fine. At least for the scholars. Breaking news, Brazil was the first one placed in the number of applicants.
Really?
For the US.
That,
By far, we beat it
really?
UK and there's people that speak English.
Yeah. So, yeah. So how do you, why is that? Why? Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Because we work
Is
hard.
it you? Yeah.
We work very hard in the outreach. I have 2 people dedicated to doing this kind of thing for 2-3 months, bombarding people
Yeah.
with, hey.
Yeah.
Mostly our alumni here and there. So, yeah, this is the way it works. So it's, don't tell anybody.
No.
I don't want competition.
Yeah, of course.
I want everybody.
Of course, yeah, that's great.
So, let's see you tomorrow in, okay, so dinner 7 tomorrow, okay?
I was just commenting with some guys, some of my friends.
Yeah.
They are
Oh,
participating.
yeah.
And I asked it, well, what did you, what was your impression about the edit part of the module? And they said, it was not so good as the first one. And I said, why? Because I don't understand anything. I said, so hit the point, because that's for mobilizing people.
Right. You knew it already, like
I
why?
think it was the
Yeah.
target. Huh?
Exactly. If you knew it, you wouldn't need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were.
That's
Made some.
that's always the thing, though. It's like, right? I mean, that's just like our students too. It's like, here I can.
Yeah.
Let me have this. Does he need to charge it? And
No, fashion.
Wow. Great. That's great. Thank you all. Wow. All right. I'm impressed. Okay. Thank you. So I hesitate to interrupt the conversations, but I did want to do one more thing before you all have time to work until we close out for today. All right. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about some specific implementation strategies. And then the last 30 minutes, hopefully, will be for you all to spend however you think will be most productive. So to continue the conversations you were just having, or to work through one of the other 2 worksheets that are in that folder. The other ones are around implementation guidelines and thinking about that perspective, like how do you want to implement these, write those guidelines for your class. But like I said, I'd like that to be whatever you all will find most helpful. And so what we'll do is I'm going to skip through these slides so that they are there so that we can get to the last thing. So it's going to be a little bit about policy, but we are going to move through this. It's just talking about effective or ineffective guidelines. We're going to move through this just so we can get to these 4 different activities. And with those activities, we will then jump into the choose your own adventure version or portion of the day where you pick what you want to work on, all right? So there are just some guidelines there for your reference. The 4 approaches though, okay, so we're going to skip this small activity. And this is one of those 2 activities that I'm referring to that you could work on later. So it's a collaborative guideline development exercise. And then here are these active learning strategies, all right? So there's going to be 4 of these. I put 5 because I forgot to change it to 4. So the 4 strategies that you may want to think about in your own course. And because I love a good learning theory, here's one more theory to close out for today, which is around cognitive load. So who's familiar with the idea of cognitive load? So it's this question, there's different ways of thinking about the sort of what you're asking someone to do, how much you're asking someone to do at one point in time. So you can think about this in terms of intrinsic load. So that's the sort of complexity of the learning material itself. Extraneous load, so sort of other information that's not quite directly related to that instructional material. And then there's going to be a germane load. So that's the material that's like really specific to a task or to building some sort of understanding, right? So what we're going to do then is talk about some strategies for implementing tasks related to helping students learn appropriate or responsible use of AI in the classroom, and we'll kind of tie it back to these ideas of cognitive load. All right, so the first activity is going to be an AI audit activity. And the idea here is to help students learn to critically evaluate AI outputs. So the process is you provide students with some AI outputs that have embedded errors in them. Right now, this can either be because you just took the AI output and you identified the errors themselves, or because you have intentionally put some errors in that output, right? So you have modified some output in some way. And now the task is to give students that output with the instructions of trying to identify where there are or there may be errors in that output. So you can use this framework systematically to have them, and this is basically in that kind of reliability check and maybe the authenticity check. And that's going to be where that part of the framework would show up. And thinking about the scaffolding you do, so you can do this in various ways. You can say to your students, here in this portion of the output is where there may be an error. You can say, hey, in paragraphs 1 through 4, there is some error. Or you can just tell them there may or may not be an error here. So it's your job to identify if there is an error, where it is, and so on, right? So you can scaffold it in different ways, but that would be one example of an activity. And the idea is you're trying to get students to think about how do you actually go about verifying some sort of AI output. And then that's just where those ideas of cognitive load would show up. Second activity, oh, here's some tips for implementing that. So you can start with obvious errors, like I said earlier, and then you can sort of remove the amount of scaffolding you're providing, make the errors more difficult to identify, give them fewer clues about where those errors may be. All right. Next activity, this moves along. Very good. This is AI tool comparison. So now the idea is you can give students some AI output from a few different systems and ask them to be comparing. So use multiple AI tools, have them compare the output from tool 1 versus tool 2. And the idea here is to help them build some sense of identifying where there is better or worse output and help them sort of understand that these systems may not all be the same. So then they can develop that task appropriateness skill for identifying, okay, I know, for example, Gemini is better at this task than ChatGPT and so on. Or they're all terrible at this task, right? So there's this role of judgment there. And then the idea is they need to be documenting their findings thematically in that process. So they're asking themselves, okay, which outputs are more or less accurate? Which assumptions does each tool make? And this will get to the third one around reverse engineering in a second. Why might these systems disagree with each other and why? And then just thinking what biases might be present in those different systems. All right, so this third task is around reverse engineering. So the idea is you give students some sort of output, and now it's their task to try and identify what may you have given to that AI system that led to that output. Right? So they're just trying to understand exactly how do you end up with this kind of output from some AI system. So you show them some AI generated solutions with the original prompts or without the original prompts. Then they're trying to figure out, okay, what do I think you put in to get to that output? Now that's going to relate to this C in that framework, right? The context awareness piece is what that's going to help drive home. Right? And in theory, that should help them understand like the importance of clear sort of input there, clear problem specifications. And finally, this fourth strategy is AI collaboration projects. Now you're asking students to collaborate with an AI system in some way, and it's going to be much more about documenting their process. So you give them some project that requires AI collaboration. They're documenting their process along the way. So they're documenting their interactions with the system. They're now, in theory, also going to go through this whole metacognitive cycle, or like the metacognitive regulation or the self-regulated learning cycle. So you're asking them to document what are they going to do, what are they doing, what do they do in that whole planning cycle. So you can be deliberate about having them practice that. And then the final presentation, would include some sort of reflection. Now, if you want to, you can also include some social learning aspect to it by having students peer review each other. Here's what I did, here's why I did it. Now they're sort of interacting. So there's different variations of that, right? So those are 4 strategies that you might consider using in your class in some way to help with students and developing some AI, responsible AI use. Okay. Okay, so those relate to transfer theory in a few different ways. This last portion starts to talk about assessment, but because it's already basically 4:57, 4:58, I'd like for you all to have the last 30 minutes to work on, like I said, either continue the conversations from 15 minutes ago or start to work on the collaborative guideline task or some student guidelines activities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up those other documents here. So you all already went through exercise 4-1, which was that role-playing exercise earlier. And so you can pick that up and keep doing that, or think about either the student guideline development, so guidelines for students for their use, or this curriculum integration planning, which is thinking about which of those 4 strategies that we just talked about might you consider using in your own course in some way. Right, so that's what those 3 worksheets are. Again, you've already seen that bottom one, exercise 4-1, and the other one is, okay, helping start to develop some policies, which we'll talk about more tomorrow, or thinking about the curriculum integration for some of those activities, right? So those are the options for the last 30 minutes. Of course, if you want to do something else, I'm not going to know any different, but that's my suggestion for the next 30 minutes or so, all right? Questions before the break for that? Yeah. Yeah.
In engineering, and I was considering techniques with my students, and we figured something that I would like to ask you.
Yeah.
To use senior students to teach the freshmen, for example. What do you think about that?
Good. Okay. So
regulated learning.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. So there's a question around like, what are my thoughts around self-regulated learning in the scenario where you have your more senior students maybe helping to teach more junior students, like first-year students, for example, and as their role for like self-regulated learning here. And so I think there's a few different thoughts there. First one is I'm always we're all educators, so we all know that there's an aspect of when you're when you're trying to teach something to someone else, you hopefully very quickly identify what you don't know. So there's that aspect of like helping the senior students. Now, like as it relates to self-regulated learning, there are ways to do that, right? So like you're having the senior students plan what they're going to do and then do that. I think about that a little bit less from the perspective of self-regulated learning and more just from the perspective of that social learning and that social learning idea. You could have them though, maybe taking that more metacognitive approach of, all right, what's the task that we need to do? Like, and this is why, like I said, when we start teaching something or trying to teach something, we quickly, hopefully, realize what we don't know. So it helps the senior students with that metacognitive knowledge. So hopefully they realize, oh, I'm trying to teach second law of thermodynamics, and I barely understand entropy. It's like, how am I going to teach this to first-year students, right? So like, there's that piece of it. And so I would think hopefully it helps the students, the more senior students, with that person knowledge aspect to it. So I might think of it more from that metacognitive framework. Yeah. Thanks. All right. All right. So we have until 5. We're here until 5:30 technically. What? All right. So this is work time. Wait. Hi, thanks. 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 Am I, or is just that? Yeah. So like with these workshops, thanks. Oh, thanks. this workshop.
Let me tell you something that it's about crazy. We call curso is the program.
Okay.
Course. Curso.
Yeah.
Is the program.
Yeah.
Disciplina is the course.
What?
And then it's crazy. So I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if people understand what in your courses because it's in our disciplinas. Okay.
Yeah. So what if I said class? Okay, so if someone says class,
It's not the same meaning, of course, but it's easier for communicate. Crazy.
I mean,
be back here tomorrow morning. One thing I want to mention was, I didn't mention earlier, was like a lot of these materials that we're, having to share by. Sorry, you all see you and audience here, but also you all then take back all here for your department. That would then be working with other faculty members, really for the the word, but find, you know, use these as resources. Well, so want to make sure that you all know that was our intention on that. Mitch, Bailey, any final thing for there? All right, well, thank you all again. See you all in a moment. Thank you. Aí, ó.